Thanks very much for having me. And I'm only sorry that I can't obviously be with all of you in person because getting together and the fellowship is one of the great things that Rotary brings communities together by, and not just the work that it does in the community. And from that perspective, I do have a long-standing relationship with Rotary that goes back to 1994, when I was an exchange student from District 9800 into the northeast of Thailand, into a town called Udon Thani in the northeast, the largest city in the northeast, and loved my time there. And to this day, obviously, wedding and children's births excluded, it remains my fondest memory to my life to date, including my time in public office. So when we get to Q&A, if there are any questions there, I'd be more than happy to take them as well. Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land of which we meet and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging as well. Can I also pay respect to all of the members of Rotary and their families that have been assisting and participating in the response to COVID-19, whether it be just here in Australia or around the world through your friends and family beyond our shores. It's going to be with us for a long time, and our economic response, which I'm about to touch upon, is going to be one that will have more twists and turns than a snakes and ladders game. And the things that we learn about today are going to hold us in good stead for tomorrow. And one of the things that I want to start with is that the work rules have changed. And as a community, we need to adapt to that, whether it be working from home, which I believe we'll be doing at least until the end of this year, if not rules changing about working from home into next year, 2021, whether it be about businesses digitalising and providing opportunities for their employees post-COVID-19 to continue that opportunity to work from home. And of course, everybody's different. And so I'll draw upon one of my experiences at Australia Post. When I was at AP, I came into a workforce where there had been some considerable disruption over the previous 2 years prior to me joining. And one of the things that I needed to do was talk about the culture of the teams that I inherited. A small thing was fixed desks versus hot desking. And most of the teams that worked in the group that I managed, legal, corporate secretarial, communications, regulatory affairs, they were effectively people that came in and out every day, and unless they were part-time, of course. So there were some people that loved the flexibility of hot desking. There are others that liked the rigid knowledge of coming in each day to a set seat, to a set assigned desk. And then there were others, of course, that were pretty carefree and could go with the flow either way. Point being is that today's manager needs to be able to have that flexibility to be able to adjust to what their people need to ensure that you get the best out of them. For some people, that will be easy to do. For others and other industries, that will be a far more difficult task. You can't see a dentist virtually. You can't do some work behind your desk at home all the time. And of course, people being people, we crave interaction with other human beings. As much as I love seeing you all on Zoom, there's nothing like being able to be in the same room, work off the energy that the room provides you, being able to shake hands, kiss old friends and give them hugs and have that personal connection. And that's something that the government has tried to address with the significant investment that they've put into mental health issues. And it would be remiss of me not to mention that really near the top of my speech. The economic imperative is without a doubt something that is intrinsically linked to the mental health well-being of people, whether they are small business owners, whether they are PAYG employees. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we provide the support to people that can get it when they need it. And if you have a look at the statistics at the moment, unfortunately and sadly, suicides continue to be significant in the community, and it appears that they may well be continuing that trend for some time to come. And if you have a look at the reasons for it, it's not too difficult to understand. Now, I am going to make a broad assumption, and forgive me because there may be some people that will be upset with me for making this assumption. The assumption I'm confident that I can make is that most people on this call are well off, that we have an opportunity to survive through COVID through a variety of ways, through strong fiscal management of our own personal budgets, through the opportunity and the positioning that we've put our own businesses in, or otherwise. But the vast majority of people out there, sadly, don't necessarily have that level of comfort. They come from a position where they literally go from paycheck to paycheck. They work to a just-in-time schedule where money comes in, money goes out. We've seen, of course, the tragic consequences for small business in particular, where they can't pay rent because they're not occupying their premises. This is where the digitalisation of the economy, unless they're in a direct services-based industry like a cafe or a restaurant, will become critical for them. I'm a director of an ASX-listed company. We have already in the last few months downsized our footprint across both Australia and Asia Pacific. We've had to do that because we've had to respond not just to a significant reduction in revenue, but also we've needed to manage our cost controls accordingly and recognise that having a footprint in terms of physical space is not necessarily going to be the way that we move forward as a business and respond to the issues with COVID. So work rules have changed. Businesses need to adapt. We need to digitalise, reduce our cost base. We need to change our overheads and we need to be able to increase our margins where we can, because ultimately doing that gives ourselves the best opportunity to be profitable and gives us the best opportunity to survive what is really, and apologies for using a much used word at the moment, it is unprecedented. We have gone through the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008. I remember the recession of 1991 as a 15-year-old and seeing what it did to family mortgage rates with my own parents. I have experienced tremendous personal loss through the bushfires of 2009 when I was the chief executive of the timber industry here in Victoria, and seen what natural disasters can do and how it can impact a community well beyond those directly affected. But this is unprecedented, well beyond anything other than probably a global war in terms of disruption to our lives and disruption to our markets. And so the response to it from both government and business will have to be hand in glove. We will have to see the state government and the federal government working together in a way we have never witnessed before. And if people think that the National Cabinet at the moment is working or not working, it'll be interesting to hear. What I'm telling you, for us to survive as a community, that National Cabinet and the collegiality that will have to be seen between leaders, without a doubt, has to be of the primacy in response. And I'll take you through it. The first thing is regulatory reform and cross-border reform. When I was Small Business Minister, I undertook a cross-border reform trial in Albury and Wodonga with the Federal Small Business Minister, who's a very dear friend of mine, Craig Laundy, and the New South Wales Deputy Premier, who was Small Business Minister at the time, John Barilaro. The idea that the normal rules, and by the way, it's a bit of irony that I start with cross-border regulatory reform when we're not allowed to cross any borders at the moment at all. Victoria is a bit of a pariah state, of course, and I hope in time that that gets relaxed. But in Albury and Wodonga, for example, if you are a staff member in a publican's premises in Wodonga and they have a pub in Albury, and they're short-staffed and they say, hey, can you just go over? It could be literally 5 kilometres away. Can you go and work in the pub over there? Previously, prior to setting up this cross-border regulatory reform, they would have had to go and get 2 different types of serving with alcohol approvals and licenses, right? In 2020, that's no longer the case, but back then, only 2-3 years ago, it was. Same thing with taxis. You could grab a taxi from one city, cross the border into another, and that taxi driver was not authorised or allowed to pick somebody up to go back across the border. Simple things, but have meaningful impact on people's lives. And what we need to do is make sure that we're removing a lot of that red tape, that regulatory impediment, to enable businesses and people to function, because coming out of COVID, we need to make things as easy as possible. By the way, for those of you interested, I will finish on taxation reform. I'm not avoiding that topic, and I'll give you some examples of taxation reform that needs to go on. But I've talked about food serving, alcohol serving, taxis. Also, things like heavy duty machinery require different regulatory controls. So we need to get better at managing those. It's a small example, but as you can see, when the borders were closed, nearly all of the media within the first 48 to 72 hours dealt with cross-border towns. And again, a key example here for those of you that are unaware is the hospital system, because we've already had cross-border healthcare whereby Victorians and New South Wales governments work together in providing, or the provision of healthcare to cross-border towns, and we have reciprocal services and costings included. I want to jump onto service delivery, public sector reform. There has to be public sector reform leading the way. Public sector always provides a guidance to the private sector about what we do and how we do it, and then private sector responds accordingly. At the moment, probably the key service leader in this is Services New South Wales. I don't have time to go into why, but I can assure you that Services New South Wales, led by the New South Wales Minister up there, Dominello, is without a doubt leading both data services, customer service digitally, responding, and Victor Dominello has done a great job, and I'm a big fan of the work that he's done in this space. But all governments, all state jurisdictions and federal government need to lead with that. And you've seen the federal government in the last 12 months indicate that they want to take the Services New South Wales model into Services Australia, and we need to wish them all the success in that. I notice it's 1:40, and I do want to leave time for some Q&A. Taxation reform has to be a critical part of the response to a post-COVID environment. I know that I've brushed over a little bit of digital. I'll come back to digital in a moment, but I do want to spend some time on tax reform because I don't want to lose time at the end without having done it. Small businesses in the community when I was minister, and it's largely the same figures, probably 1 or 2% out, so forgive me, but small businesses make up roughly around 96% of all businesses in Victoria, right? However, they only make up about 47% of employment. So think about that, 3 to 4% of business employs 53% of all people. Now that means that whatever our response needs to be, it needs to focus on the SME sector without a doubt. But we also need to make sure that we don't lose sight of big business and big enterprise as well. It's a fine tightrope to walk, but we need to make sure that we do it. So this is why I said to you, state and federal government have to work together in a way that they haven't done for a long time. Whatever state government does, it is literally a drop in the ocean in terms of the tax reform system. So if you have a look at payroll tax, for example, and the figures for FY20 have not yet come out, but if you have a look at the last financial year of 2019, payroll tax was only 6.2 billion of Victoria's revenue. Stamp duty was 6 billion. Land tax was only 3.5 billion. So it doesn't matter what reforms Victoria does to payroll tax and stamp duty in particular, and land tax, we need to make sure that we're doing something that targets business, because of course state governments are largely responsible for what they do there, but also the federal government working hand in glove with state governments because of what they do for individual taxation at the same point. Because we are going to have to, and I've never subscribed to a view that the cart or the horse, the chicken or the egg is the employee or the business, or either or. You need both. It's a symbiotic relationship. You can't have one without the other. You can't focus on one without dealing with the other. You need to make sure that your public policy response deals with all areas. It can't be one faceted, because otherwise what happens then is a pendulum swings too far one way, and what happens when it swings too far one way, it will swing too far the other. So we need to make sure that we keep things centrally focused as much as we can. The federal government needs to respond to the individual, and state governments need to help respond to business. So at this point, I'm happy if you all want to unmute your microphones with what I'm about to say, and you can applaud this. When I said it, Minister, I was off quoted. I repeat it today. I will repeat it until I have my last breath before I die. I hate payroll tax with a passion. The person that invented payroll tax, if we could go back in time and find them and just keep them quiet just for that moment, it would be a wonderful thing. It is literally an impediment to businesses employing people. To think that the more people you employ and the more that you pay somebody, the more tax you have to pay, is really the antithesis of supporting growth and investment in the area. However, we also need to recognise that payroll tax on its own is not an impediment to businesses being successful. I would often say that if a small business is financially unstable and believes that payroll tax is the only thing standing behind it, between it rather, to being profitable or being obviously put into administration, then I will show you a business model that is unsustainable. That doesn't mean to say we shouldn't address it, but it needs to be done proportionately. So number one, I would continue to reduce payroll tax as the Treasurer has done, both while I was a minister and since I've left Parliament. I would completely do away with payroll tax in regional Victoria. And if that means some businesses relocate from Melbourne into the regions, I'm okay with that too. There are going to be some intended consequences. There are going to be some unintended consequences, but we can manage those and we can be prepared for it. It's not as if payroll tax came up yesterday and we don't know what it does or how it operates. Secondly, at payroll tax for $6 billion on annual revenue, if I was the Treasurer, I would be looking at putting some kind of economic stimulus plan that would see payroll tax voided for nearly every small business customer in Victoria for a minimum of 12, if not 24 months. Certainly the next 12 months for the next budget, I would void payroll tax. I would also do something about land tax. I wouldn't do something about stamp duty at this point, because stamp duty is a transaction tax. Whereas land tax, if you do something with land tax because there are people that use property and investment to encourage stimulus, I would then create a policy or have a look at a policy that deals with land tax for businesses that pass those savings on to their lessees. So if you do that, then you're passing through. Just in the same way that rent reduction has been provided through various jurisdictions, and hopefully that gets through to the landlord as well. It needs to be addressed. We can't have a system where one person is winning and another person is losing. We are literally, and forgive me for saying this, we are literally all in this together. And if we don't come out of this together, if we leave people behind, then we are going to create intergenerational poverty and despair, the likes that we have not seen. And Australia has managed to avoid most of the problems that the United States has in particular, the welfare system. We've had a miss because we've tried to make sure that the policies that we've implemented, yes, ensure that we have slightly higher costs of operations, but at the same time, we get more for that as a society and as a community. Now, 15 minutes to go, I was asked to talk a little bit about cybersecurity as well, data analytics and what that means. In terms of the digital economy, I love the digital economy portfolio. It was one of my favorite portfolios. We have some amazing companies that you may never have heard of. Obviously, everyone here will have heard of car sales and Seek and realestate.com.au. But have you heard of, for example, Cultramp? Or have you heard of Airwallex or 99 Designs? These are Australian companies that have gone around the world and back again and are hugely successful. We also, for example, Nitro PDF. Nitro PDF, for those people that don't know it, is a competitor to Adobe. It has got more functionality than Adobe. It is cheaper than Adobe. And it was started by Australians who left Australia to San Francisco and now have engineering bases in Dublin as well, and have done an amazing job. But why don't people use Nitro PDF? Because of course, no one got ever sacked for hiring IBM. Same thing, everyone knows what Adobe is. People aren't necessarily aware of what Nitro PDF is. So we need to get better as governments to supporting local ingenuity and making sure that people that have that ingenuity are supported. We've seen people talk about manufacturing more at home to try and secure our medical supplies, for example. Well, if you're going to try and look at those kind of reverse engineering policies in the manufacturing sector, it's not too much of a difference to have governments look at trying to factor in supporting the building of new industries here at home. But to do that, we need to move away from lowest cost wins. We need to look at life cycle. We need to look at investment and opportunities, employment and growth as well. Cyber, massive issue. I could do another talk on cyber alone and the challenges that we face. Back in 2011 and 12, when I was the Deputy Chief of Staff to Senator Conroy at the time, I had responsibility for cybersecurity as an industry policy. When I became Minister, I looked after cybersecurity as an industry policy here in Victoria. We created the Oceania Cybersecurity Centre. We did a deal with Data 61 that saw them create their cybersecurity hub here in Victoria. We brought in the Oxford University's Global Cybersecurity Capacity Centre model. The first time Oxford had collaborated outside of Oxford University, they set up an office here in Melbourne and collaborated with the OCSC. We did MOUs with the state of Virginia. Believe it or not, it's actually called the Commonwealth of Virginia, something I learned when I was a minister. We have more Commonwealths than just our own, albeit they operate uniquely in the US. We did MOUs into Israel. Cybersecurity continues to be of topic, even though a lot of people don't understand it. I did a speech at a small business conference about 3 years ago. I asked all the small business owners how many of them, for example, had their data, their client customer data, on the same laptop or computer that they did their financial transactions with their banking, as well as potentially their FPOS transactions with their customers if they owned a retail business, etc. Almost no one put their hands up. It was quite surprising until, of course, people came up to me at the end of the speech and spoke to me privately and said, I'm going to have to go back and ask that question because I don't know, right? We are exposed in ways that people don't actually understand. And the fear is the damage that could be done into our economy as we're looking to recover post-COVID as well. 5G, the issue of 5G, of course, is closely linked with Huawei, the Chinese telecommunications company. I have to be careful with what I say because I did receive both briefings, national security briefings when I worked for Senator Conroy, even though it was nearly 8 years ago now, and also as a minister here in Victoria. What I can say is that the federal government's position on this is sound. It is not something that they woke up one morning and said, how can we face a competitor that happens to come from China that is the cheapest competitor, and how can we not take advantage of that price and size and scale in our own market? That's not what the federal government did. I am at one with Minister Dutton and the Prime Minister on this. It is of concern, and the federal government should be applauded for its stance, as should the federal opposition for supporting the federal government and not playing politics. TikTok's an interesting one. We've seen a divergence of views. We've seen the federal government say nothing to see here, we're okay with it. We've seen the US government, obviously through President Trump, express deep reservations over TikTok, including potentially banning it if there's not a foreign sale of the US arm of TikTok. The concern, of course, about TikTok is the ability for it to geotag people in videos where they are, and also to take your face and also recognize what you are, who you are, what you're doing, where you're doing it, and to put that in algorithms that then can take advantage of that. However, to be able to do that, they need to have access to a whole range of other systems as well, which is why I think you've seen a lot more caution by the federal government here at home about the capacity for the for other state actors to inappropriately use that data. And then finally, what does this mean for all of you? Well, what it will mean for all of you will be very different, because it will depend upon what businesses you operate in, what sectors you compete in, how you operate already, and also the likelihood of you being directly impacted. Do you run, for example, a consultancy at home? Do you run a retail business? Do you run a business that operates in the city of Melbourne that is not likely to have traffic in it well into 2021? There are a whole range of issues that we as a society will need to come to grips with, but at the beginning of it will be the response, the economic response, the social response by the state and the federal government. And councils will have a role to play here, but we need to be able to make sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Councils, local government authorities have the closest links with our community. State government next so, and then the federal government beyond. We need to see all three arms of government working together. And I can tell you, even though I'm out of public life in terms of politically, I do believe that there's a role for all three arms of government to work collaboratively and do their respective service delivery. Because if you don't have one doing a service, yes, you have some duplication in administration, etc., but the service lines are often not duplicated. I don't quite understand why we have some departments at a federal level when state governments are responsible for service delivery in those. However, that's potentially another issue to do with federation for another time. We can get through this, but we will only get through this if we are all working together.
Thank you, Philip. That was comprehensive and it answered many questions, especially one that I always have had is why can't all three levels of governments work together? We have a couple of questions, one from past President Robert Fisher, who wants to know, do you see a time where we will all be working in offices again and travelling interstate to go to meetings, or will it remain, you know, working from home and video conferencing, and which one's more important?
Okay, so I absolutely hope so. I'm one of those people that craves interaction with other human beings. And I'm not too proud to admit there are times that I'm really struggling with being stuck at home as well, although, you know, what better chance do I have of 3 young children and my wife to be stuck at home with? So that's a win. I'm only saying that because my wife's actually in the same room that I'm giving this speech to you all. So although she's told me she's not listening, even though she heard me say that. So I think we will, there will come a time when there will be a degree of normalcy about how we move and when we move. I can't see it happening soon. It will take some time, but we will get there. In terms of where we go, and it really depends upon the ability to get a vaccine. I'll be pleasantly surprised if that a vaccine comes out. I think in much the same way that we get flu injections every year, the flu injections don't stop you from catching the flu. What they do is they severely restrict the impact the flu will have on you if you do catch it. I think that's where we're probably heading towards a COVID vaccine, because as we've seen, there's been a lot of commentary over the last little while about how the virus mutates and changes. And I think that that's probably going to be a fact of life, but this will require us to make changes to the way we do business and the way that we interact with people. I think masks are here till the end of the year as a minimum. And I think that if we do a couple of those changes, then we'll be able to start seeing life return to some sort of semblance to what it was pre-2020.